Hey everyone, I'm Shaylin here with Reedsy. So today we're back with another Q&A video, and I'm just going to be answering some of your questions. If you have any questions about the content of any of our videos or just anything you're struggling with in your own writing process or publishing process, leave them in the Google form linked in the descriptions of this video or any of our videos. So let's jump into the questions. I often have trouble developing characters, especially side characters. Things like story, plot, and setting come easier to me, but I struggle with characters. It's easier to figure out their goals, motives, and function within the story because they're tied to plot, but more colorful things like personality, likes, dislikes are more difficult. Is there a way to just get the creative juices flowing for character development? I find if I'm really struggling to get a character's personality, to kind of click, the thing that I find most helpful is to identify a few interesting, specific details about this character. That really helps kind of set the foundation and give you points to branch off from. So figuring out things like a very specific interest or very foundational memory or very specific habit or belief that they have, something that's really specific and really, really personal, I found is a great way for me to kind of crack that initial outer shell of a character and actually start to figure out who they are. I think for me, specificity, I will always say, is I think the key to good writing. And I think it's because that's what feels personal, that's what feels real. Broad things are too broad. How do you even work from something like a very broad trait, like being like, oh, okay, this is someone who's funny. Lots of people are funny. But if you can identify a very specific habit that they have, that tells you so much more about them. And I find that identifying those really specific details is actually kind of what helps me begin to really view a character as a person and someone who's real and alive and can kind of just move on the page. I also think it can help to just do some writing exercises. I think a great way to hone in on a character's personality is to write test scenes. Write scenes from this character's perspective, how they move on the page, what does this person look like? This is a great exercise to do before you start writing your book so that you're familiar with kind of your character's voice and how they live as people before you start writing. The next question is also about characters. I would like to hear tips on how to criticize the protagonist in a story. If I'm writing an unpleasant and morally corrupt main character, I naturally want the story to push back against these traits, but I would like more subtle ways than simply having a different character confront or sermonize to them. This is a really great question. I think the best way to have a story critique a character without it being explicit is through consequences. So showing the consequences of their actions, but also their beliefs playing out in the story. If their negative actions have negative consequences, not just for those around them, but also for them, that's critiquing those actions. If their beliefs ultimately lead them down a path of unhappiness or some other kind of negative emotional path, it doesn't even have to be tangible, right? They could do bad things, get what they want, but still end up in a bad place emotionally because of the motivations or beliefs that were fueling those actions. It's also just good storytelling, right? We want to see consequences playing out from what happened. And so if your character makes bad decisions but there are no consequences, it can be unsatisfying on a story level as well, right? Showing consequence is just a natural part of interesting, compelling storyline. And it's also a great way to, in a case where you have a morally corrupt character that you want the story to critique them by showing instead of telling. If they are ultimately harmed emotionally, and I think that that's the key, whether they fail or succeed from the external sense, looking at where your character is emotionally, seeing how, these traits or these actions that they've taken have ultimately led them kind of to a darker place emotionally. I think that that is a great way to critique a character without ever explicitly stating that you're doing so. So the final question is also about characters, so that's kind of the running theme of this video. No one wants to have flat characters, but I also don't want to overcomplicate them just to try and avoid this. Do you have any advice on how to tell when a character is flat or how to strike the right balance? So I'll say right now that I don't really know if you can overcomplicate a character, because people are pretty complicated. People in real life are quite complicated, and it's exceedingly difficult to match that level of complexity, actually. I don't even know if it's possible to overcomplicate a character to the point that they no longer feel believable. Now, I do think a character could be overly complicated if the way you've complicated them is not cohesive. If these different traits and qualities and beliefs you've given them don't feel cohesive, they don't feel understandable, that could begin to feel overly complicated. But if everything is working together harmoniously with how you've created this character, you can't really have an overly complicated character. Once you get to a point where a character feels real to you and you can write them as if they were a real person, the complexity that they have, no matter how deep it runs can translate on the page, and that's ultimately a good thing. So I would actually recommend running with the complexity. The mantra that I like to take with character writing is don't explain, complicate. So instead of just explaining kind of simply why they are the way they are, complicate them. People can't just be easily explained like that, but people are very complicated, and we can explore the origins and nuances of our character's complexity, and that's ultimately often the fun of a novel, and the point of a novel is to explore the complexity of a character and how that's going to manifest in a story. So that's all for this Q&A featured around characters. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any new videos from us. We've got new writing, editing, and publishing tips every Friday on this channel. Until next time, bye!